We have now had about an hour or two to have a look at what the government has actually proposed in its particular motion. And I just want to take the first element of the government's proposal. And the government is proposing there to request the Governor of the Central Bank to report to him, thus the Governor is going to report to himself, on the performance of the respective functions of the Central Bank and Financial Regulator in the period since the establishment of the Financial Regulator up to September 2008, having regard to the statutory powers, roles and responsibilities of the Central Bank and Financial Regulator. There are three things I want to say in relation to that. First of all, I have a lot of admiration for Professor Patrick Honohan, and I welcomed his appointment, and I welcome the fact that he now holds his office in the Central Bank. But I have a feeling that this is a poisoned pill that the government is passing to Professor Honohan, because I find it extremely difficult to understand how Professor Honohan, now being the boss and the chief executive of the Central Bank, can actually carry out an inquiry that involves the staff and the papers and the policies of the institution that he is now the governor of. And I think the government is seeking to put Professor Honohan in an invidious position, which is not helpful to the future proper governance of the Central Bank, or indeed is unfair to Professor Honohan himself. Now, if the government simply has in mind a mere review, which, as it were, points forward to what Professor Honohan, as governor in situ of the Central Bank, has in terms of thoughts about the new Central Bank / Financial Regulator legislation, that's a different issue, because that's looking forward, and it is not actually carrying out any kind of a review into what happened in the Central Bank from the time that there was a turf war between Charlie McCreevy and Michael McDowell and the Department of Employment and Enterprise as to who should control financial regulation in this country. You also have the fact that, as the former governor has been at pains to point out on several occasions, that the Central Bank did, in various reports, include references to their concern about a property bubble. But I have heard the previous governor comment on many occasions that he was powerless to impact and influence the banks because, if you like, there was a zeitgeist, there was a political system in operation here then, led by the former Taoiseach Ahern and the former Minister for Finance, Charlie McCreevy, which said, bubbles are good when I have it, spend it, and ramp up the property market and help it to ramp it up even further by means of tax breaks. So I think to ask the governor to make any serious inquiry is, as I said, to put him in a very invidious position and a contrary position, because he would be asked to report on people, or perhaps to review and comment on people and papers who are now currently on his current staff. And I just don't see how that particular thing would run. Secondly, the government wants to commission an independent review from a recognised expert or experts of high standing and reputation to conduct a preliminary investigation. Now, in the bill that the Labour Party has put forward to correct the default in the Abilara judgment and the gap or lacuna in relation to powers of Dáil committees to inquire, in the bill put forward by Deputy Rabbit, we have actually sought to address that issue by providing for a preliminary investigation, and as speakers on all sides have recalled, that was also something which was done by the Controller and Auditor General in the preliminaries to the Dirt inquiry, and of course the Dirt inquiry was a subcommittee of the Public Accounts Committee, but also held its inquiry pre-Abilara. And Abilara, in its particular circumstances, drew down a decision from the courts which has cast into doubt the power of an Oireachtas committee to ask questions and to get and require reasonable answers when put in an appropriate framework. So the Labour Party, alongside this resolution, has offered to the government, in a bipartisan spirit, actual powers which will restore the proper powers of the Oireachtas to make reasonable inquiries into matters of public importance. Now, these two reports then, these two reports are also to do international, social and macroeconomic environmental reviews. It almost sounds like an environmental impact statement. That's probably attributable to the Green Party, that particular bit. It doesn't actually mean anything, though. And the reports shall have regard as appropriate to the De La Rosière and Turner reports. Now, the point about the De La Rosière report is the De La Rosière report is designed to actually create a European-wide framework, and its French author has in mind a framework which would provide basically for what you might almost call a college of regulation via and connected to the European Central Bank that would try to ensure that the European banking system, and particularly in the euro area, would not be subject to the kind of destabilisation that was visited on central mainland European countries, not Ireland, because the Irish collapse is absolutely different to the reasons that German banks, Swiss banks and so on collapsed. It's fundamentally different. And we are being dishonest with ourselves if we don't recognise the peculiar homegrown banking collapse that we have had. Our banking collapse is like what happened in Sweden in the early 90s, and to a lesser extent Finland, which were caused by homegrown property bubbles. The De La Rosière report is simply something that a future Irish governments are likely to subscribe to in a general sense as a reforming process on a court of regulators or a college of regulators throughout the EU. The Turner report obviously arises in a particular context, and Lord Turner, by the way, has been one of the principal advocates for open and accountable critiques of the financial institutions, because, you know, Lord Turner's personal experience is somebody who has worked, over a long period in the City of London. The point about bankers is that, wonderful people and all, is that they are serial recidivists. And if the bankers feel any sense of let-up on the part of the government that we want to cozy up to you guys again, those bankers will be out of the traps, before you can snap your fingers, and as we've seen already, they will be back to the bonus culture, and they will be back to Gordon Gekko and greed is good and all the other little slogans that senior bankers have over their desk. Now, in the United States, they are making a profound political argument. The people say, for instance, at the top of Goldman Sachs, right? They are making a profound argument, which is that because they have made so much money and have paid an awful lot of money, in the case of Goldman Sachs, they've paid everything and more back to the US Treasury for the bailout. They are arguing from a philosophical point of view, in the kind of market that the United States has, that they are now entitled to recommence paying bonuses. Now, there's an argument for that, but I can tell you, the Irish banks can't even get together a rights issue. What shareholder has already been ripped and stripped by the Irish banks would contribute twopence to a rights issue at the moment? So, people who think that you can take comfort from what has happened in the States, remember that their fundamental problems are different to ours. Now, I've spoken already about the committee that has started, and it's one of a number of inquiries that have happened in the States, and that has already begun its work. But that commission is bipartisan. It's bipartisan, and it has power to call and order papers. If the Minister has had an opportunity to listen into any of the Chilcot inquiry in the United Kingdom, In the Chilcot inquiry, members of the Commission have been empowered to seek all of the papers without restraint as a basis for the questions that they are asking of serving ministers and prime ministers, previous ministers and previous serving prime ministers, so that that country can get an answer as to why they went to war. Our equivalent question in this country is, why did our banks collapse and bring ruin on the general public? Now, if a democratic institution like the Dáil, and this, 2010 marks the beginning of the decade in which we will celebrate the Easter Rising and the First Republic in this country. If we cannot, in the First Republic, answer questions about what happened in terms of the biggest financial collapse, then I think it is really time that Fianna Fáil move out as soon as possible. And there are those of us here who want to see the establishment of a second republic that will have reform at its heart and its core, and that will actually seek to defeat the corruption that has characterised so much of what has happened in Ireland over the last 12 years. And that is a political mission that the Labour Party is determined to embark on, sustain and bring change as soon as a general election becomes available. Now, can I just address myself to the whole business of inquiries? After the Great Crash, there was a major commission in the United States called the Pecora Commission in the 1930s. And one of the things that happened with the Pecora Commission was that the then oligarchs of finance in the United States were brought up in open inquiry before that commission. And one of the things that emerged, and that was really startling in the States at the time, was that some of the biggest oligarchs of the US financial system of those days, when they were asked, what was discovered was that they paid no tax at all. Because the way finance capital was structured in the States, rather like it has been structured in Ireland over the last 12 years, was that people at the very top had arrangements which facilitated them paying no tax. And because there was no tax to pay, obviously, the super profits, the accumulation of capital that they made was so extraordinary that they began to feel themselves, as people usually do in that situation, far more powerful than any mere democratic forum with all its faults and weaknesses as well as its strengths. And what I'm saying to you is that it is historically disappointing that Fianna Fáil has tried to dodge the bullet of honest and open inquiry, when in fact, if we really want to give hope to young people in Ireland that they can stay in this country and build their future, we will opt for reform, and we will opt for openness, and we will opt for people, no matter how wealthy they are or they were, being invited to come forward and tell their story. There's nothing wrong with any business failure. Business failure is a feature of life in business all around the world, and people get up off the floor and they build up the business again. But what is wrong is business corruption. And what is wrong is a structure that distorts the structure of a country, whether that's the tax system, whether that's access to credit or access to finance, that only favours the creation of an oligarch system as has developed in Russia. So what I want to say to the government is, I think you are throwing away an incredible opportunity to actually have a genuine bipartisan examination of what went wrong, and to face up to that. That obviously includes, for some members, past and current of the government. That involves hard and difficult questions because they have to actually acknowledge their own part. On Christmas Eve, I received a one-sheet anonymous letter, which I just want to refer to briefly in my closing remarks, because it concerns my, I suppose, old adversary in terms of the finance brief, the then Minister for Finance and current Taoiseach, Brian Cowan. Over the recent years, I had two arguments with Brian Cowan. One about contracts for difference and the collapse and what was done to make the Dublin Exchange a casino that in turn led to the losses that the Quinn family sustained in the contracts for difference. That's something that has to be examined. But the second thing I took issue with him was about the fact that developers were entering into arrangements all the time to ensure that stamp duty could be avoided at the then rate of 9% compared to 1% that was available if it was done through a share transaction from company to company. Now, we had, myself and Brian Cowan, the then Minister of Finance, long discussions about the wisdom of this. And I told him, the problem is when you have no taxation structure in a bubble, you're actually not benefiting anyone. You're just encouraging the prices to go higher. And the example that I chose was one with which I had become reasonably familiar, and that was the glass bottle site in Ringsend. All of this is on the record of the House and of the committee in detail. All of this, no, hold on. This is what we have to, sorry, this is what we have to find out. This is what we need to find out about. Because in the letter that was sent to me on Christmas Eve, presumably from somebody in an accounting firm, it went into the company called Beckbay, and how they wanted the arrangements hurried up so as to be sure of getting this stamp duty avoidance arrangement. Now, anyone who thinks that we can look at how this bubble was created without looking at the political complicity between Fianna Fáil, the developers, and the bankers, led by Anglo-Irish Bank, is fooling themselves.
2 minutes left.
Okay. And, you know, what you have to be what you have to be aware of is that the letter that I got, and I'll give you a copy of it, and I'll read a copy of it into the record. The letter that I got was only an ordinary letter about a very common or garden, ordinary bit of tax avoidance. It only involved a tax avoidance and a deal worth about 500 million. It only involved tax avoidance of about 48 million. In the whole scheme of things, it actually wasn't that much. But this kind of arrangement was central and core to why we lost the run of ourselves and why this government ended up admiring Anglo-Irish Bank. Yesterday, Judge Peter Kelly talked about Zoe Developments and arrangements in relation to a 500 million loan. And you have a legal background yourself, Minister. All secured on undertakings. All secured on undertakings. I saw the son of a very prominent developer who's fallen on hard times, writing, I think it was in the Sunday Tribune at the weekend, about how, you know, the personal guarantees were what banks came to rely on towards the end, even though they were meaningless. One developer in my own constituency, who told me, thank God, he's only in Tanama for about 75 million, so he's okay. Not the kind of figures I would personally deal in, but he seemed to be able to take it on the chin. The banks were outside his offices, or at his phone, ramping up what he would bid and what he would look for. And unless we get that area of inquiry, in this inquiry, we will simply encourage the bankers to go off as soon as this is over and repeat exactly what they have done to the economy. And in that case, perhaps, they'll be waiting for Fianna Fáil, after maybe 10 years out of office, to return back to office and let them start all over again.